protesters who insist that they are tribeless as well, but who are coming together with one common voice, which is the state of the nation and their displeasure at how the current government is running affairs in the country. The Gen Z have also decried the deaths of protesters who they say met their death under the wrath of police officers during the protests. They have also decried what they describe as illegal arrests. We've also seen Kenyans living in other parts of the world, Kenyans in diaspora, Washington, D.C., over the weekend, rejecting President Ruto's plans to engage the public through the National Multisectoral Forum. There's also been demands from diaspora for the immediate release of all those arrested during the nationwide protests. And as the Gen Z continue to take to the streets, the Nairobi business community also raising concerns over lootings and over their businesses remaining closed on two very critical weekdays and business days for them. They say they have suffered losses over the past 2 weeks of protests against the finance bill. The school calendar also seemingly affected, with most private schools remaining closed on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And now we are going to be crossing over to listen to the sentiments of Raila Odinga, who is speaking. As of now, let's listen into that. But before that, again, just to continue with our coverage, we'll be bringing you live updates from different parts of the country. Let's listen into what Azimio leader Raila Odinga has to say.
The Central Committee of the party has this morning held a meeting to deliberate on the ongoing crisis in Kenya. This meeting is happening at a most difficult time for our country, given all that has happened in the last few weeks. We are acutely aware that many families are still in mourning, having lost their loved ones, with civil society groups estimating that over 30 young Kenyans fell to the regime bullets in the course of the street protests. Many of these families are yet to bury these victims. On behalf of the entire ODM party, the Central Committee extends its deepest condolences to all those who have lost their loved ones and pray that God will comfort them in this time of tragedy. We also know that many were injured and some are still in hospital. We wish all of them quick recovery. We are in awe of the Kenyan youth who, through their unity of purpose, have stood with their fallen colleagues and raised vast sums of money in very short times to pay hospital bills for the injured. As a mass movement that has been on this journey of true liberation for a long time, we know how difficult it is to achieve some of the things that we have seen you do. You have absolutely earned our respect as a party, and we salute you. As believers in the right to peaceful protest as enshrined under Article 37, we condemn in the strongest terms possible the abuse of police power in the deployment of violent suppression techniques on innocent and armed protesters. Our position is that no one has to die in exercise of the rights under Article 37. We further condemn the ongoing arbitrary abductions of innocent Kenyans who are carted away in the most violent and inhumane manner and held incommunicado for days. As we speak, the reports are that upwards of 50 individuals have been illegally abducted and their whereabouts remain unknown. To make it worse, it is clear that no one in government is ready to take responsibility, to render an apology, or to make amends. The head of state himself has tried to distance his regime from these killings, injuries, and abductions, instead conjuring up theories when everyone can see the blood on his hands. We have the most callous, insensitive, and obtuse regime in the history of Kenya. It is no wonder that chants of Ruto must go are ringing out all across our land. Government must never abdicate its responsibility to protect life and the property of its citizens. And if it does, as Ruto has done, it deserves to go. As a party that was founded on the tenets of social justice, We shall walk the journey of bringing about justice and accountability for all of the regime's crimes since they took power. We stand with the people in their quest to liberate themselves politically, socially, and economically. Kenyans asked us to stand with them against the punitive tax proposals in the finance bill, and we did. Of the 115 members of the National Assembly who stood with the people and voted against the bill on the floor, 73 were in fact members of ODM. We applaud these great patriots and thank them for being true representatives of the people. As a party, we celebrate you for being on the right side of history, and the party has charged the Honorable Opio Andai and the Whip Junet Mohammed to convey this message to each individual member who stood with the people of Kenya. Sadly, a few of our members went against the wishes of the people and sided with the oppressor, and we will speak to the consequences shortly. In light of this state of affairs, the meeting has resolved as follows. Number one, that it is time for all of us in the political leadership to begin to listen. Listen to what the people are saying and not to our own voices. The young people have spoken in plain language that should be clear to everyone. Let's not be vague. Let's just do what the young people are telling the government to do. Number two, we consider this to be Kenya's last best chance. The youth have given our country our last best chance. We either seize it and swim with it by implementing all their demands, or we ignore it and sink the country altogether. Number three, that the Kenya Kwanza regime must take full responsibility for all the deaths, injuries, and destruction of property arising from the violent suppression of peaceful protests. The president must publicly direct his security organs to forthwith seize the ongoing abductions, an exercise that we believe is being undertaken with his full approval and the approval of the state. He must account for and order the release of all detainees abducted by these security agencies. Number four, that the Independent Police Oversight Authority must expedite investigations into all these incidents, including allegations of mass murder by police in Githurai and in Rongai. We were shocked to watch the president claim on live television that only one life was lost. It tells you how out of touch with reality he is. Number five, that in our view, what happened on the 25th of June 2024 amounted to a vote of no confidence in the Ruto regime. It is clear that this fact is totally lost on Ruto. It is reflected in his petulant proposals on how we manage our economy following the rejection of his tax bill. Instead of focusing on cutting wastage, opulence, and corruption in his regime, he is hitting back at the Kenyan people with threats to cut funding for the judiciary and the county governments. Six, that the ODM party will support credible austerity measures in the executive and in parliament. These two institutions have been expressly indicted by the people as citadels of largesse and wastage, with fresh memory of the invasion of parliament and standing threats for occupation of the executive seat of power. These two institutions must have an honest introspection on their contribution to our current predicament and take measures to lessen the taxpayers' burden. As a party funded by taxpayers ourselves, we will also be taking steps to scale down on our presence across the country and some of our activities to reflect this new economic reality. Lastly, that ODM shall initiate and lead recall processes in the following constituencies in light of the current office holders' repeated violation of their sacred oath and the wishes of their electorate. Number one, Game constituency. Number two, Bondo constituency. Number three, Navaholo constituency. Number four, Kajiado Central. Number five, Ikolomani. And lastly, Suba South in Homa Bay. Thank you. That is the end of the statement. Eric. Jeff, yes, sorry. Kirui, can I first take questions that are related to the statement we've read? Brad,
yeah.
please.
Now, you see that you support the demand by the youth. One among the demands is the definition of do you support that?
The youth have spoken in clear and certain terms. Let us not pretend like we don't hear what they are saying. You have heard it, we have heard it, Ruto has heard it. Next question.
Calls for that.
No, because nobody believes what the president is saying. His actions and words are totally different. And what we have called for in our statement, first of all, is he must publicly speak to his police, publicly, and tell them that he knows what they are doing and Kenyans have asked that he stop. So if he doesn't stop that, really, there is really nothing to discuss. Many of the people he's looking for to have a discussion with are actually in custody. Yes, Luke.
From 5 constituencies that you are going to
6. Yes.
How did you arrive at 5?
Yes, the criteria was very simple. In our statement, we have said repeat offenders. Those who voted against the wishes of the people in 2023 and again did it in 2024 because there are few who met their Damascus moments this year. Yes, this is the criteria we have applied, Luke, and we want to be able to focus on these 6 as a lesson to all the others. Is there any other question?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Asanteni sana.
Walijifanya kumbe uwezi wa meiblo. Kumbe ulikuwa umeshatoa kamera. Serious? Ulikuwa umeshatoa kamera? Mimi nilitoa kamera. Ni mimi nilitoa. Hiyo weight yote inaenda na tripod. Hiyo si nimeshikilia tripod. Sasa nimeenda kuvuta nikakutana nayo.
ODM party leader Raila Odinga there with members of his party attending the party central committee meeting where ODM Secretary General Edwin Sifuna has spoken, and in a statement issued by the ODM party have decried the killings of young Kenyans who have fell victim to bullets aired by police officers in the wake of the protests. The ODM party saying over 30 young Kenyans have fell victim to the bullets and indiscriminate killings by police. The ODM party also saying that it is in awe of Kenyan youth and what they have achieved in standing in solidarity by raising money for their injured and also standing in solidarity with their fallen compatriots, those who died during the protest, by raising money for their burials and also raising money for those who are injured and still in offices. They also proceeded to condemn the abuse of police power on innocent and armed protesters, saying that no one has to die while exercising the rights of the Constitution. The ODM party has also condemned abduction, saying upwards of 50 individuals have been abducted in the ongoing protests, and that it is clear that no one in government is ready to take responsibility. The ODM party also criticized the head of state for distancing himself from these abductions, saying that the government must never abdicate its responsibility to protect lives. The ODM party also saying in its statement that it stands with the people, and that of the 115 members of the National Assembly who rejected the Finance Bill, 74 of those members were from the ODM party. And the meeting has resolved, this ODM special meeting has resolved that it is time for political leadership to begin to listen. And the ODM party continued to say that they consider this to be Kenya's last best chance, saying that if the country is able to seize this opportunity and implement the demands of the youth, then maybe then there is a chance to redeem the country from the chaos that we are currently seeing in different parts of the country. The ODM party also called on the Kenya Kwanza government to take full responsibility of deaths and destruction of property, and called on President William Ruto to instruct his security organs to cease abductions and to release all detainees, also calling on the Police Oversight Authority to investigate the mass killings in Githurai, and saying that what happened with Kenyans rejecting the finance bill is a vote of no confidence, reflecting in the fact that Kenyans have lost complete trust in the government of the day. The ODM party finishing its statement by saying that as a party funded by taxpayers, they will take steps to cut down on expenditure, and also called out office holders for repeat violations, mentioned Gem constituency, Bondo, Nabaholo, Suba, and others as well. Of course, being a statement that was given by the party Secretary General Edwin Sifuna, and in attendance was ODM party leader Raila Odinga during the party Central Committee meeting that is currently underway. We're continuing to keep a look at the situation in different parts of the country as Gen Zs resumed their Tuesday demonstrations today. They are back on the streets protesting against the Finance Bill 2024. They are also continuing to express their unhappiness with President William Ruto's leadership on different social media platforms. We've been bringing you pictures from different parts of the city here in Nairobi and also in other parts of the country. As we continue to take a look at what is happening in parts of the country, I'm joined in studio by Ken Echesa. He is a political scholar as well as an advocate of the High Court. We're looking at a situation that is replaying itself 3 weeks down. We're seeing a relentless group of protesters who, despite the president in his televised interview on Sunday extending an olive branch, saying he is open to dialogue, have continued to take to the streets. What distinguishes the style of these Gen Z protesters compared to previous generations of activists in Kenya? We're seeing them continuing to be relentless, even despite the president continually coming on TV and taking a different stance on issues, saying he is willing to listen. We still see them relentless as ever.
Thank you, Lillian. What we are witnessing in our country is unprecedented. In our history, we've never witnessed such demonstrations, not even in our worst moments in 2007-2008 during the post-election violence. It is even more unfortunate that the President of the Republic has addressed the nation 3 times, on 3 occasions, but the demonstrators are still on the streets. One thing, The demonstrations today are happening under a very different regime, under the new constitution, which offers a lot of protection to the demonstrators in terms of the Bill of Rights. Number two, the demonstrators are using unprecedented methods in terms of mobilization, social media mobilization. But most importantly, that this is the first demonstration in our political history that is leaderless. It's not directed by anyone. So there is no one to negotiate with, no one to talk to, and no one to convince to cede the ground. What the president should do, in my opinion, is to struggle and harness the national goodwill so that the nation is with him in convincing the Gen Z to stop the demonstration. But unless and until the president harnesses the national goodwill through action, we are going to continue witnessing these demonstrations, which are causing untold havoc to the economy of our country and to the social fabric of our nation. We've just listened to the Right Honorable Prime Minister's party, Raila Odinga's ODM, give a press conference, and we thought that it was going to be a press conference that is going to call for calm and what, but what we see is actually a rubber stamp to what is going on, and still calling on the president to react toward the Gen Z, the demands that he has been given.
And you know, this has moved away from being a Gen Z movement, because what we are seeing now is the Gen Z themselves calling on all Kenyans of all walks of life, of all ages, to marshal their support behind this mass movement. In terms of, before we get to the ODM and their statement, in terms of how the Kenyan government has responded to these protests, we know that the president has addressed the nation 3 times now. So in terms of the response to these protests and what impact this had on this mass movement, what is your analysis on Kenyans' response to the president, even now being open to dialogue this coming Thursday?
One, in the eyes of Kenyans, the president has been abandoned. He is seemingly the only one who seems concerned in government that there are demonstrations. The rest of government is not speaking. The minister in charge of security and interior has not spoken to the nation for the past more than 72 hours. And the president has been making serious attempts to speak to the nation, but the nation seems not to be listening. Why is the nation not listening? Perhaps the president is not speaking to the heart of where the problem is. There was a list that was circulating within social media of the demands that people are making. And these are not the demands by the Gen Z. It's the demands of the Republic coming through the Gen Z. Even the simplest of the demands, by now and by demonstration of goodwill, I think the government and the president ought to have acceded to 1 or 2 to demonstrate to Kenyans that we are indeed concerned about what this generation is raising. What the president requires does not even require the Thursday meeting, a forum. The president can issue an executive order that will address 70% of what this young generation has raised. The offices, the corruption issues, the regulation of government, reducing of the ministries is something that the president can do through an executive order. He doesn't have to wait for the meeting. And if the Kenyans have to listen, then we have to keep asking the government, what is the bare minimum you are doing before people go on to the negotiations? But without that, I think we're going to go into much storytelling. We have meetings that are being planned, but I think the government is also getting it wrong. If you go on space as the head of state and as a government, how many Kenyans are on Twitter? You are going to speak to a different group from the people on the streets. Will the president target the people now on the Wayekwe demonstrating on the CBD? Some of them have no phones. Those who have phones, perhaps they're not smartphones. Those with smartphones have no bundles. So what is your target audience?
Yeah, and talking about target audience, I want us to go back to, the altering of the public discourse, around governance and accountability in Kenya. The X space being one of the ways that the president has said he is open to engaging with the people who are obviously, really making their opinions known and seen on these social media platforms. But in terms of you saying that this would leave out a significant chunk in terms of public discourse, we're talking about religious institutions. We're talking about, many other interested parties that might perhaps not find an opportunity to voice their opinions here. What would be the best way forward, now that you say that perhaps the X space might not be the best avenue to, find a way forward?
One, the president needs to start by demonstrating goodwill, the general goodwill, by doing the bare minimum. If there are issues of corruption in government, the president has the power to hire and the fire. Let him do that. If there are things he can do without necessarily getting approvals of institutions, let him do that. And secondly, he has to break the audience into some targeted groups. If you want to meet the youthful people, go to the social media. Mm-hmm. If you want to meet the churches, go to NCCK. If you want to meet the media, talk to the media. If you want to meet the religious community, the business community, go to different business communities. And he must release his government to deal with this issue. Mm-hmm. The government, the public is wide. He may not be able to address all the issues as the head of state. He must first bring his government together, and he must ensure that the whole of government approach is involved in solving this crisis. For instance, we have people who listened to him on Sunday, but how many people are able to watch the mainstream media that he was speaking to? This is the time to even go to the local media stations and speak to the people. This is the time to organize county-based forums and speak to the stakeholders. If he is alone and he can manage this, let him do it. If he has the government that he can delegate, let him do it. But there seems to be a breakdown in communication between the president, between the government, and the people who are being governed. And that is why, as he speaks, nobody seems to be listening. And that tells him he has to change the approach of engaging Kenyans.
Nobody seems to be listening, but do you believe that this wave of activism could lead to substantial changes in government policy? The things that people are basically talking about, governance, accountability, political dynamics. Do you think that we will see a shift by taking to the streets and by continuing to say what you're saying is not enough, we're still not hearing you, you're still not hearing us? With this very aggressive and continuing wave of activism, are we likely to see any substantial change?
Yes, and we're already witnessing the substantial change, because for the first time the president has refused to assent to a bill passed by parliament, not on his own accord, but by bowing to the pressure of the electorate. For the first time, we have seen members of parliament apologizing to the nation and their constituents for voting in a particular way that was not inconsistent with the people that they represent. We are going to see a wave of change in the way government policy is developed, is implemented. We are going to see a fundamental change in the way government deals with corruption. What this generation has demonstrated to government is, well, we can ask you to act. If you don't act, we can act as well. In terms of getting the people's power and people's voices to be heard, we have succeeded as a country through this generation. However, my fear is that if this goes unmitigated, we are going to cause havoc and untold mystery in terms of economic and the social fabric of the nation. People are dying, lives are being lost, property is being destroyed, and we do not seem to have an end game to all these. This is a movement that is leaderless. This is a movement that is tribeless. You can't go back to your tribe and say, I am under attack. Even at your own home turf, people are demonstrating. You can't go back to the leader and say, please let us talk. They have no leader. So it calls for some high levels of wisdom and approach to tackle this movement.
There have been concerns that as these protests continue, there's the risk, of course, of loss of lives. Let's talk about the role of police and security officers in managing these demonstrations. Of course, we've seen use of disproportionate force against the protesters. We've seen incidents involving the firing of live ammunition, wielding of batons, deployment of tear gas. the purple rain, or is it the pink rain? You might call it purple or pink, depending on whether you're colorblind or not. But in terms of the role of security forces in managing these demonstrations, your assessment 3 weeks down the line in how they have handled this entire crisis, what would that be from where you're sitting as an observer?
As an observer, I think the security agencies have failed the nation. One, the primary role of the security agents is to protect the citizens, to protect life. And secondly, is to protect property. You cannot end people's lives in the name of protecting property. It is life first, then property second. And we have seen police use excessive power, use live bullets, use tear gas guns, throwing them at demonstrators, and in the end, killing them. And this perhaps is where the government is getting it wrong in terms of approaching and dealing with the demonstrators. We are using the 18th century approach to the 21st century demonstrators. Previously, people would carry stones, people would mobilize by political heads. Today, these young people are mobilizing themselves through social media. They are releasing placards and leaflets on social media telling them tomorrow we're occupying parliament, we're occupying CBD, and so forth. But the police are still deploying the same mechanism they used 2-3 years ago to quell demonstrators demonstrating today. Previously, they have been targeting the leaders. Today, they have no leader to get to target. And therefore, the first approach is let us educate the police on the best approach to dealing with the 21st century demonstrations, especially the Gen Z demonstrations. 2, 3, 4 days ago, a judge sitting in Malindi issued an order restraining the police officers from using tear gas, live bullets, and rubber bullets. What we are witnessing on our screens are the policemen using tear gas and doing everything that the judgment spoke against. And when the president spoke to the nation, he committed to rule or to stand with the rule of law. He kept speaking to the rule of law. And one of the demands by the Gen Z generation is adhere to the rule of law. If you cannot respect a simple court order telling you do not use rubber bullets, do not use live bullets, do not use tear gas, and in the open media space, we are seeing them using tear gas and so forth and so on. Where is the goodwill? But,
Ken, we did see there from pictures in Kangemi, while these protests started off as being largely peaceful, they seem to have taken a life of their own. And we must admit and accept that there are people who take advantage of such protests, criminals, petty, looters and robbers and what have you. So while the police, might argue on their own that they're ready to escort and provide security to the protesters, we have seen elements of persons that have taken advantage of these protests and actually thrown, stones and hurled stones at the security organs that are on the ground. In such a situation, how then would the police be expected to
That is quite sad. It's quite sad. And the demonstrators, people on the streets should know that they are protected by law. But they lose that protection immediately they turn violent or they arm themselves. The police is allowed to use reasonable force when he is endangered, when his life is in danger. And by throwing stones, you actually send a message that we are trying to endanger your life. If we get to you, we can do something else. However, this should be isolated cases. I do not believe that all demonstrators throughout the country are throwing stone and are using force. In the CBD, during the morning hours, people were very peaceful, even those who had not come to CBD with the intention to demonstrate. But we saw police dispersing them. And therefore, the police can also be very provocative to the demonstrators, just like the demonstrators can be very provocative to the police. We call upon both groups, the police officers and the demonstrators, to exercise restraint and do whatever they are doing within the confines of the law.
Yeah. And, we also know that hundreds of demonstrators, perhaps not hundreds, but even from this ODM statement right now, according to the the numbers that they're giving is that apart from over 30 young Kenyans losing their lives, there are many more, upwards of 50 persons that have been reported missing or that have been abducted. So, without knowing, where they have gotten these numbers from or where they lay claim to these numbers, we do know that there are, in fact, people who have reported their loved ones missing. They could either have been arrested or, they might have lost their lives and are still unaccounted for. So in terms of these illegal arrests or detention, and of course, we're also talking about persons that have sustained injuries. Let's first of all begin with the illegal arrests or detentions under the law. If at all you are picketing and find yourself behind bars, the recourse in terms of being the booking, first of all, the OB, and then again, how long should you be detained for before you're produced before court? Because the concern is that a lot of these people have not even been have not been booked in most of these police stations, and therefore nobody knows where they are.
That is an illegality, and in fact, the right to the writ of habeas corpus. Habeas corpus is a legal Latin term to mean produce the body whenever you're asked to produce. That is a right that is not limited by law. And once the police arrest you, they must do the honorable thing of identifying themselves, informing you that they are police officers on duty, informing you of the reason of arrest, and upon arrival at the police station, they need to book you and give you an OB number. This OB number must be brought to closure and you are released. And if you are not released within 24 hours, you must be produced before a court of competent jurisdiction. Even if they have not established a case against you, they are allowed by law to produce you before court and ask the court for an extension of time to continue holding you so that they can prepare the case against you. In this case, we've seen people who were abducted from their houses, from the streets. They have neither been booked in the occurrence book at the police stations, nor have they been produced before courts. And we saw the Chief Justice directing courts to sit even at odd hours to determine the applications for habeas corpus, which means the applications arising out of the abductions. And for the first time, we saw a court in Naivasha sit on a Sunday to address or to review the issue of the bond bail application that had been denied by the lower court. It's therefore illegal and unconstitutional to hold on to someone beyond 24 hours unless at the lapse of the 24 hours it is either on a weekend or a public holiday when the court is not sitting.
And of course we had the ODM party in its statement talking about the police oversight authority calling on them to investigate the quote-unquote mass killings, what was observed in Githurai, which of course the president, not the president, but the government in itself continues to remain mum about, because we have not yet had a clear word on what exactly happened there. So in terms of, the oversight authority investigating these mass killings, the extrajudicial killings, why as of now have we not had any word at all communicating to Kenyans what exactly is going on? There's a sense that people are losing their lives. There's a sense that people are being abducted illegally. There's a sense that there are police officers who are arresting persons without identifying themselves.
And with profound respect, my practice as an advocate tells me that the only thing that is independent about independent policing oversight authority is the word independent. IPOA runs like a government agency, and it is difficult to ask a government agency to investigate another government agency and expect results. This is not the first case where the IPOA has failed to act in good time. There are various complaints about the police excesses across the country over the past 10 years, and the IPOA has done nothing. And then most importantly is that IPOA runs like a toothless dog that can bark but cannot bite. IPOA does not have the prosecutorial powers. It does not have the powers beyond the report they make. And once they have made the report to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, they become functus official. They cannot do anything.
Functus official in English terms, wakili.
Their term ends there.
Their term ends there. Functus official.
Functus official, yes. And therefore, you take them to a report that this police officer has acted beyond their powers. They'll make that report. They'll do their investigations. They then make the report to the Directorate of Public Prosecutions to act. Another report is taken to the National Police Service Commission to act. So IPOA is a conveyor belt. To also condemn them is to be unfair. Then they cannot give you what they have done. They don't tell you what they have done because legally they can do nothing. They pass the files either to the ODPP for trial or the National Police Service Commission for disciplinary measures. They cannot discipline a police officer. They cannot arrest a police officer. They cannot prosecute. They are a conveyor belt.
But then again, just going back to that statement by the ODM party there in the Central Committee meeting where they're calling on the president to instruct his security organs to cease abductions and to release all detainees. Does the president have the power to do this?
The president has the power because the president is the chairperson of the National Security Council. And any death occurring anywhere in this country, we blame the president because as the chair of the National Security Council, he ought to know and to give general direction. The president has a ministry called the Ministry of Interior and Coordination of National Government, the one headed by Professor Kindiki Kinduri. This is the ministry under which the police officers fall. This is the ministry that supervises the police force. And therefore, if the president cannot supervise the minister who supervises the police force, he is right to be blamed. He has actually the absolute power to tell the police through the line minister to stop doing what they're doing if they're doing anything illegal.
And just talking about the extrajudicial killings, Ken, are there lessons that Kenya can learn from other nations in, first of all, preventing? And if in the unfortunate event that these extrajudicial killings actually do happen, in addressing extrajudicial killings, where can we borrow from where there have been extreme cases and how, those particular democracies or jurisdictions have learned from such scenarios?
I think Kenya cannot borrow from its peers in Africa because what we are witnessing in Kenya is worse in other African states that I may not want to mention, but from the Western countries, we've seen demonstrations in the United Kingdom. We've seen demonstrations in the United States of America where government deals with demonstrators while exercising restraint. They do not use excessive force. And whenever life is lost, the president himself accounts for each life that is lost. However, we must also say that the demonstrators in those countries, in those civilized countries, also demonstrate with restraint, demonstrate within the legal framework of their countries, making it easy and simple for the police officers to also exercise their power within the confines of the law. As we ask our country to borrow from progressive jurisdictions on how to end extrajudicial killings, we must also nurture a culture of demonstration that is devoid of violence, that is devoid of looting. However, in South Africa, this has critically improved. From an African perspective, South Africa offers us constructive lessons. It offers us constructive lessons because the government has been more friendly, even to the demonstrators previously, to the opposition, and there has been constructive engagement between the non-state actors and the state actors. However, excessive use of force in Kenya is just like it happens in other countries we don't want to mention, but it is a bad exercise, is a bad reputation. It spoils our image at home and our image abroad.
And, just going back to a lot that was said during, Sunday's televised interview, the Kenyan public has continually observed discrepancies between what has been communicated and what has been done. Now, How can the current government of the day, in view of the fact that there's a lot of trust issues that are obviously going on, build trust with its citizens, particularly the youth who seem to be the most aggrieved and antagonized in the wake of these events?
You see, I go back to what I said, that the president is a lone ranger in the struggle to bring back normalcy. Why do I say so? Having watched the head of state on Sunday, what came out is that either the head of state was ill-prepared for the interview or he was misled by his government to give some of the statements that he gave. First, we kept arguing whether 19 people died or 24 people died. Even if only one person died, that was gross violation of that person's rights, and it ought to have been a matter of concern to the Republic. Whether it is 1 life or 100 lives is a matter of concern. Number two, the president kept on saying that since we've rejected the finance bill, which sought to raise 347 billion, we are going to have austerity measures and we must brace ourselves as a country for tougher times. But then he quickly adds that he's going to borrow $1 trillion. If Kenyans have rejected 464 billion, why should you then borrow $1 billion? Yet, one of the things that have sent this generation to the streets is the debt issue, that we are over borrowing. Why are you then telling them that we are going to borrow more? If we were to borrow 467, we're not going to borrow $1 trillion. It comes out that either the president's advisors have failed him or the president was ill-prepared for that particular interview, which is adding insult to an injury, is not solving the matter. He has spoken to the nation 3 times. The first time, the second time, and the third time, and the people are still on the streets. That means that the 4th time, he must have a well-prepared script that will speak to the people's hearts and calm them.
But aside from the people and what they want, and even if the president's concession manages to see off the immediate threat of more unrest, and perhaps, hopefully with Thursday's dialogue, if at all we see the protesters backtracking and, somehow holding at bay because of what will be the outcome of these conversations, it still leaves the president caught between the competing demands of, his hard-pressed citizens and of lenders such as the IMF. The situation still remains that, and he maintains that we have huge debt concerns as a country.